All right, we're going to get started with our class. Henry, I'm going to keep my jacket on until I start sweating. Because, man, it is cold. We are looking at the 12 apostles today, as we have been the last few weeks. And as we begin today, I want you to think, calculate the number of how many friends you have. How many people would you consider friend? We don't need to count every single one of them. But are we looking at, numbers in the tens or hundreds of people you would consider friend? Thousands? That might be getting out of control. Although I do think I have 1,000 friends on Facebook. So yeah. People like me. What about this? Because trying to figure out the how many friends you have. How many close friends would you say you have? Think about that. And there's only 12 of you, so I would like some interaction here. How many close friends would you say you have? Less than 10, Shelby says. Less than 10?
Yeah, many acquaintances. At least for me, very few I put the close friends category.
Yeah. Anyone else? Close friends? What's the criteria for close friend?
We've built relationships for a length of time, communicating and sharing.
Does anyone have a best friend? Do we still do that as adults? Best friends? I still have my best friend. He's been my best friend ever since we were kids. His name's Scott Robotham. His last name is spelled Robot Ham. That's how you spell it, is Robot Ham, but it's pronounced Robotham. He lives out in Pennsylvania. But we met when we were 4 years old at daycare. And then, in the small village that I went to, it's like everyone knows everybody. But we happened to pick the same instrument for band. So we sat next to each other in that. We both played football. We both were, huge nerds. And so we went to college together. We roomed together in college. He was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his wedding. It's like, even though distance has separated us through the years, I still introduce him, or I talk about him as, this is my best friend. This is my best friend, Scotty, here. So I don't know if if most adults still have or qualify people as best friends. But typically, how many best friends can you have? By definition, one, right? It's the pinnacle of the friends list. Rod?
I'd have to qualify them as somebody will get up at midnight, and you call them and tell them to come jump your car. You're stuck somewhere.
That's the qualification for that's the qualification for best friend or close friend is the ones who you call up at midnight to come jumpstart your car. I'm not many people's close friend then. Except for my family, they consider me close friends. because I've had to do that. In the Gospels, we have the listing of the 12 apostles. We got 4 lists, so Gospels plus Acts. Matthew chapter 10, verses 2 through 4, Mark chapter 3, verses 16 through 19, Luke chapter 6, verses 13 through 16, and then we get them again in Acts chapter 1, verse 13. It's the same 12 men that are listed in each, and the order of these lists is strikingly similar. That it wasn't like Matthew had his favorites in the group, and so he put those at the top of the list, and then John had his favorites, and he rearranged the list. Nope, and all of them, they are listed pretty much in the exact same order. And what we see in them, it's just a listing of names, but when you start looking deeper into each of these individuals and the story of Jesus through the Gospels, what we get is 3 groups of 4. And perhaps you've heard of this before, of like Jesus had his what you would call them inner circle people, and then kind of those that he didn't spend as much time with as the others. But the first group contains Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Those names just kind of roll off of the tongue because we see Jesus interacting with these 4 individuals much more than the other 8. The second group is Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, and Thomas. And the third group is James the Less, Simon the Zealot, Thaddeus, or also Judas, and then Judas Iscariot. They appear to be listed, at least from my understanding, or the way I'm seeing this, is they're listed in descending order based on their level of intimacy with Jesus. It seems to suggest here that even though Jesus was God, that even with a relatively small group of 12, that it is still too large for one person to maintain the closest intimacy with each group member. And so, if Jesus can't do it, then no leader should be expected to do that either, of to have perfect and deep levels of intimacy with all manner of individuals. And my thought goes to the church today, right? Whether you look at myself as a leader or our 5 elders, even if you broke up our church into evenly distributed them amongst our 5 elders, that's still 50 people, which is, it doesn't sound like, oh, it's just 50 people, but 50 people is a lot to try to keep up with and stay in contact with and try to develop deep relationships with. And Jesus seemed to have deeper varying relationship levels with different individuals. The 12 also had wildly differing personalities. If you think about just in that first group there, but the difference between someone like Peter and someone like John. Peter, we tend to know a lot about because there's a lot written about him, and there's a lot spoken about him. But Peter was eager and bold and outspoken. What comes to your mind when you think of John? He's the son of thunder. Yeah, him and his brother was like, let's call down fire on this village. Love. He's in John's gospel, that's how he refers to himself, as the disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And John just so happened also to write a lot about love in his gospel and his epistles. But you look at these two and how varyingly different they are. Peter, again, was very outspoken. John, on the other hand, spoke very little. He was so meek and mild that even writing his own name in his own gospel was too much was like, let's call myself something else. But in the first part of Acts, if you've read through Acts, which is a fascinating book, I highly recommend that you do that. Peter and John were constant companions. Right? These two were going everywhere together. They were in prison together. They were preaching together. But you can check me on this. In that same section, that first, I want to say like 8 chapters of Acts, we get a lot of what Peter said. Right? We get his whole sermon. Right? In Acts chapter 2, we get all of that. How many words of John are recorded? None. 0. But they were constantly together, which it's just fascinating to me. And it shows that they're just the individuals in this group of 12 are very different from each other. Bartholomew was a very, again, outspoken and true believer, whereas Thomas seemed to be a very outspoken skeptic. And that might be harsh, skeptic or maybe realist, if you were also a skeptic and can identify with Thomas a little bit. But their political backgrounds were also very different too. Matthew was a tax collector. He was considered by many in the Jewish culture as a traitor. That he was the one working for the enemy, and not just working for them, but actively taking money and extorting his own people so that they could pay for the soldiers who were occupying their country. Right? So tax collectors not liked very much. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Simon the Zealot, who these zealots or Sicarii, they were assassins. They assassinated political enemies, people like tax collectors. And the fact that these two were part of the same company of 12 shows the life-changing power of Christ. And as it is with any group, typically there is one that rises to the top as either a spokesperson or a leader. And this person that rose to the top, whether just by his selection or his personality traits, what have you, was Peter, the apostle with the foot-shaped mouth. That's Peter's title, and we will. If you don't get that, you will by the end of today, and we're going to be spending in 2 weeks looking at Peter as well. That was so cool. I seem so important right now. Someone just handed me a message on a sticky note. A brown van has left their lights on. If you are the owner of a brown van, go check your lights. Otherwise, I will be a close friend after today and help you jumpstart your car, your van.
You have cables with you?
No, you need to supply the cables.
Some friends are more useful than others.
It's true. But is that a level of closeness? You want to keep your, the more useful friends closer to you. Anyways, Simon Peter. Simon is his name, although typically, this is interesting, right? Like we typically, you ever hear a preacher talk about Simon? Probably not very much. We typically, at least myself as a preacher, when I talk about Simon Peter, I say Peter, right? Because that's what we typically know him as. But his name was Simon. And there are at least 7 Simons in the Gospels alone, right? We got 2 in the 12, right? Simon Peter and Simon the Zealot. Jesus's brother's name was Simon. Judas Iscariot's father was named Simon. We have got Simon the leper, Simon the Pharisee, and Simon of Cyrene are all different Simons that are named in the gospel accounts. And so Simon, as you can imagine, just from reading 4 books out of the Bible, it was a very popular name of the day. But this Simon had another name as well. In Luke chapter 6, verse 14, it says, Simon, this is in a listing of the 12 here, Simon, whom he named Peter. Jesus didn't simply give him a new name to replace the old name, because we have this word in there. He also named him Peter, and so it wasn't like he renamed him. It's just it's more like a nickname. So sometimes he was Simon, sometimes he was Peter, sometimes he was Simon Peter. Peter, the name we get from the Greek word Petros, which means rock or pebble or stone. In the Aramaic, it is the same rock is pronounced Cephas. So if you sometimes in, what was it? I think it's in Galatians, right? It talks about how Paul opposed Cephas to his face, and that's Peter. But that's just the Aramaic translation of the Greek word Petros. And so it became sort of a nickname. But I think there was more to it than that, because sometimes Jesus still referred to Peter as Simon. Typically, when Jesus calls him Simon, he has done something that needed rebuking. It was something, Peter had done something, and now he was no longer Peter, he's gone back to being Simon. Simon was brash and vacillating, going back from one idea to another idea. He was undependable. He tended to make promises that he couldn't keep, and he lunged, wholeheartedly forward into something, but then bailed out before finishing. Anyone know anyone like that? Do not point fingers at me. I think we all know someone like that is, very gung-ho. They kind of leap before you look type of people, who get very excited about some things but don't realize what it's going to take in order to finish that race. It reminds me of what James talks about in James chapter 1, verse 8, where it says, he is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And Simon Peter, struggled with this a lot. And it seems that Jesus gave him the name Rock to be a perpetual reminder of what he should be. In 1983, the Dodgers got a pitcher by the name of Orel Hershiser. Anyone know Orel Hershiser? Apparently he was a good pitcher. He was I was born in 85, and so if this guy was drafted in 83, I think he played until the year 2000 when he finally hung it up. But the Dodgers manager, Tommy Lasorda, saw this young kid coming into the league, and he had a very powerful arm. He could be a very powerful weapon for them, but he was also very timid. Very timid, soft-spoken man. And so, does anyone know the nickname or the name that Tommy Lasorda gave him? Bulldog was his nickname. Tommy gave him this nickname, Bulldog, because, if you know, I know very little about baseball, but from what I can see and what I can tell, I think all baseball players kind of have an ego about them. Maybe that could be said for all professional athletes to some extent. But pitchers, in particular, they gotta have an attitude about them. They gotta get on that mound, and everybody's watching them and know that they got the right stuff. In order to, you're staring down. It's mano-y-mano up there. And they got to have this killer instinct, this killer attitude about him, or at least that's what Tommy Lasorda thought. And so he nicknamed him Bulldog And even though it didn't represent him at all, that is what Lasorda wanted him to become. And so that whenever he heard his manager call out to him, Bulldog, right? It was a constant reminder of, oh, this is what I need to be. This is what he ought to be. And he definitely lived up to that name. At the beginning of the Gospels and where we see Simon enter into the narrative, he was reckless. He was impulsive. He was over eager. And whenever he starts acting like his old self, Jesus and the gospel writers themselves oftentimes refer to calling him Simon. If you back up, if you're in Luke chapter 6, let's back up to Luke chapter 5. I'll read verses 5 through 8 here. It says, "And Simon answered, 'Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets.' And when he had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, 'Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord.'" Simon was full of doubt in this interaction, and rightfully so. This is towards the very beginning of his time that we see him spending with Jesus. But Simon sees the error of his ways and bows down and says, "I am a sinful man." If we flash forward to Luke chapter 22, we see another interaction. In Luke 22, starting in verse 31, this is Jesus speaking here. He says, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Peter said to him, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." And Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me." In the moment, he was Peter. He was the rock, right? That man making the statement and standing up for what he believed in, but Jesus had to break some bad news to him that he would soon revert back to Simon. Mark chapter 14, verses 37 through 38. Mark 14, starting in verse 37, it says, "And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, 'Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak.'" Notice the choice of words or names here. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep?" Anybody ever get full named by their parents? Like even today as adults, anyone still get full named? I do. Whenever I go somewhere, like to the doctor's office or anyone that has to, look up my official documents, and they call out, "Christopher," and then they ask me, like, "Do you go by Christopher?" And I was like, "No, there's only 2 people that call me Christopher, my wife and my mother, and it's almost always when I'm in trouble. So I go by Chris." And I feel like, for those of us who still get full named by our parents, I feel like that might have been what it felt like for Simon, to be called Simon, especially in the midst of this group of people. When Jesus said Simon, it must have made him cringe. can you call me the Rock? And Jesus would respond, he's like, I'll call you the Rock when you start acting like the Rock. You know? In the Gospel of John, in John's Gospel, he's different than the other three in so many ways, but also in how he refers to Peter here, that he always refers to Peter as Simon Peter, which makes me think here of why did he always call him Simon Peter, using both names, and perhaps because John and Peter were so close in their in their ministry and in their lives, that perhaps it's because John saw both sides of Peter so often that he chose to always call him Simon Peter. In John chapter 21, let's flip over there. We see another instance of this. John 21, verse 3, it says, Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we'll go with you. And they went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. Seems to be a common theme of these, quote, professional fishermen not catching anything. But this is the section here at the end of John's gospel here, after the resurrection and after he's appeared to his disciples, where it seems here that Simon decides that he's going to go back to his old job. He's going to go back to being a fisherman. And then we pick it up in verse 15 through 19, and this will be familiar to a lot of us. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to them, tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This was said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. Seemingly, this is a call from Jesus to Simon Peter here to, this is what I had planned for you, not going back to becoming, or going back to the life of a fisherman. But if you look at how Jesus addresses Simon Peter here, this would be the first century equivalent of full naming. Simon, son of John. And again, that must have just made Simon Peter cringe there. And most of the time in this section, we focus on the love words in here and how they're different, right, between phileo and agape and stuff like that. But look at what Jesus calls him. It's not just Simon, it's Simon, son of John. And perhaps the message here is that you're just that same old fisherman I found at the beginning, fishing with your dad. A few weeks later, after this point, Peter, it would be Peter, the rock, that stood up and preached the first gospel sermon that resulted in thousands being baptized that day. From this small amount of information that we've talked about and looked at this morning, what are some things that we can learn from Peter?
Scott? Never give up.
Never give up. Never surrender. Yeah. Peter's life was all over the place, right? Just the small portion that we got to see of his life. I can only imagine, like what kind of kid he was, or a teenager, young adult he was. But never give up.
It shows me that we can constantly disappoint our Lord, but he never gives up on us. He always loves us. He's always constant, and he's always there for us.
Yeah. Jesus was patient. Jesus was patient with overzealous, vacillating man like Peter. He's probably patient with me too.
Kind of thinking about what you were asking about friends earlier, is that it's good to have great friends around you to keep you centered and that focused.
Friends that can call you out. Like you think about that requirement for being a close friend, is someone who's not afraid to call you out when you're acting like a fool, and get you back on the right path. Jesus was that to Peter time and time and time again. Anything else come to mind when we think about Peter?
God can use the imperfect.
Yeah. God can use someone that is imperfect in his kingdom. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from Peter, from a leadership standpoint. We're going to look at that in 2 weeks from the leadership standpoint. But on the whole, when you look at Peter as just as a man, as a human, I think Peter's a lot like most Christians, struggling with their worldly side and their spiritual side. Right? Anyone struggle with that? I do, right? All the time, of being pulled back and forth, sinful sometimes, righteous other times. And you think about who Peter was. As I've been stating from the beginning, these men are just like us. They're 12 ordinary men. But there's a lot that we can learn from their example, and these characters are recorded for us for a purpose. Some more facts about Peter. We know he was a fisherman. He and his brother Andrew, they ran a family business out of Capernaum, which was on the northern side of the Sea of Galilee. And that's where they caught their fish, right? They were fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. In the sea, there were 3 types of fish that we see throughout the Gospels, whether you know it or not. There are small fish. We might call them sardines today. Those would be fish that wouldn't require much work to prepare. You can eat them with their bones. This is typically what people agree was what the fish that fed the 5,000 were, that these were small fish. There were fish called barbels, which were we would look at them and say that's a carp. And so if you know what a carp looks like, think of a carp. And they get big. They get rather large out there. And this is what most people believe was probably the fish that had a coin in its mouth, simply for the fact that it's the only fish that had a mouth big enough to hold a coin. You can look that up in Matthew 17, verse 27. There's other fish called musht, M-U-S-H-T, musht. And these grow, 6 inches to 18 inches long. And fried musht is still served around the Sea of Galilee today. It's called St. Peter's fish, is what you would order in that area. The brothers, though, Peter and Andrew, originated from Bethsaida. How do we know this? Well, in John chapter 1, verse 44, it says, "Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter." Right? And so even though Capernaum is where we typically think of, Peter and Andrew being at, it seems like they were actually from Bethsaida, which was another small town on the north shore of the lake. We know that Peter had a wife. In Luke 4, verse 38, it says, "He arose and left the synagogue and entered Simon's house. Now Simon's mother-in-law was ill with a high fever, and they appealed to him on her behalf." I don't know if you know how in-laws work, but the way you get in-laws is you marry someone, and then you get them. It's like a gift. It's like a present that comes with your wife or your husband. His name, Peter's name, is mentioned in the Gospels more than any other name except Jesus. It's an interesting fact. No one speaks, besides Jesus, of course, as often as Peter does. No one is spoken to by Jesus more than Peter. No disciple is rebuked more than Peter. No disciple ever tries to rebuke Jesus except Peter. No disciple confessed Christ more boldly than Peter. And Peter was the only human to be referred to as Satan. Jesus had harsh words for Peter that he never said to the other 11. Why do you think we see Jesus handling Peter the way that he did? He called him Satan. That's rough.
Saw his potential.
Saw his potential. Saw his potential.
Why he was harsh on him. Like a parent is with their child sometimes.
Yeah. I see a lot of potential running around here at the end of church every Sunday. A lot of energy being expended, and that's all potential, right? You gotta harness that and get it going.
Think of basic training when you were treated pretty harshly, and it was to basically toughen you up,
Yeah.
make you ready for what the world and what the military was going to hand you when you got out of that school.
Yeah. He needed to toughen up. He needed to grow up.
And it goes along with what's been said, that he saw Peter could take it.
He saw that Peter could take it.
I don't know if they take it, but maybe he needed
Yeah. Yeah. What's the recipe for someone who has a lot of pride? How do you tamp that?
Humble them, right?
You humble them, right? Yeah.
Were they best friends?
Jesus and Peter? I think so. They're definitely close friends. So Peter would probably say Jesus is his best friend. I don't know if Jesus would say Peter's his best friend,
Best friend who meet his son. And one of my favorite scriptures is in Mark 16. When Jesus has risen and the angels come and they say, "Don't be alarmed," he said, "You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter." The last time that Peter had anything to do with Jesus was when he was disowning him. And so you get the idea that Peter is probably just mourning what he has done and has no thought about Jesus actually coming back. He's probably just thinking about the mistake that he's made.
The shame.
And the shame. But yet there's a special call for Peter to be told about Jesus. And I think that's encouraging to me in, the mess ups. There's always this call to turn around and follow me.
Yeah. You're never so far gone that God can't redeem you. Absolutely. All of it, all this time that Jesus spent with Peter and the ups and the downs and, just all of this craziness, I think all of it contributed into making him into the leader that Jesus needed him to be, knowing what was going to come next. And God took a common man with an ambivalent, vacillating, impulsive, unsubmissive personality and shaped him into a rock-like leader for the church. And God can still do that today. And as far as the example that Peter lays out before us, I can't think of a better example than that. Because we all struggle. We all fail. We all fall short. And God is patient. He was patient with Peter. He's patient with us. Next time, so not next week, because next week will be the youth rally, but in 2 weeks, we're going to be specifically looking at the leadership qualities of Peter. Because as much as, we kind of looked at Peter, the apostle with the foot-shaped mouth, today, next time we're going to be looking at Peter, the leader. Peter, the leader. I didn't plan that out. It just happens that way. All right, let's end our class with a prayer, and then we will be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much again for this time that we can spend together and looking into your word and looking at the example of your servant Peter. God, there's so much to take from his example and the words that are written about him. God, it's so inspiring and so encouraging to know that this man that we often look up to and venerate was just like us. And God, thank you for this example, and thank you for what he means for our lives. God, please be with us as we go into this time of worship. God, please be with those people who are on the road that are driving here, and keep them safe and keep us all safe as we leave this place. God, help us to focus our minds on what we are about to do in offering you all the worship that you rightly deserve. We love you. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.